"I need you not to come home for Christmas this year," my father said. 3 days later, I was kneeling in a blizzard beside a fuel truck sliding off the highway, fighting to keep its driver awake. My radio warned that every news station in the state was filming me. When my father saw me on national television, what would he tell the people sitting around the table where no place had been set for me? "Major, the cab is moving." 40 minutes before my father saw me on national television, I was kneeling in the snow beside a man who was trying very hard not to die. The metal beneath us groaned again. It was a deep, ugly sound, like the truck itself was warning us to get away. The cab had come to rest at an angle on the shoulder of Interstate 70. Its front wheels were barely holding against the icy slope. Every gust of wind pushed the vehicle another fraction of an inch toward the ditch below. Snow struck my face hard enough to sting. Ambulance sirens rose somewhere behind me, then disappeared beneath the wind. 3 different voices competed through the radio clipped to my coat. The driver's breathing was the only sound I cared about. It had become shallow and uneven. "Stay with me," I told him. His name was Daniel. Blood ran from a cut near his hairline and disappeared into the collar of his jacket. His right leg was trapped beneath the crushed dashboard. Every time the cab shifted, the twisted metal pressed harder against him. His eyes started to close. I touched the side of his face with one gloved hand. "Daniel, look at me." He opened his eyes, but only halfway. The fire captain was positioned just outside the cab. 2 members of his crew were preparing hydraulic tools, while another firefighter checked the straps securing the front of the truck. "We are losing the anchor point," the captain warned me. "If the frame shifts again, we pull out." I nodded. I had worked around enough damaged vehicles to understand what he was saying. The truck was not about to explode like something in a movie. The danger was quieter than that, and much more believable. The cab was losing support. Diesel and hydraulic fluid had spread across the pavement, turning the snow beneath our boots into a slick gray film. Part of the electrical system had been damaged, and a loose cable sparked whenever the metal moved. The cold was draining heat from Daniel's body. Behind us, an overturned bus still held passengers who had not yet been brought to safety. There were too many problems and not enough time. My knees shook beneath me. Part of it was the cold, part of it was fear. People later called me fearless. They were wrong. Fearlessness is a story people tell after the danger is over. In the moment, courage is usually just fear with a job to do. I forced my voice to remain steady. "Daniel, you told the medic you have a granddaughter." His lips moved, but the wind swallowed the first answer. "What's her name?" "Lucy," he managed. "How old is Lucy?" He blinked several times. 14 months. "So she's walking now." The smallest smile touched his face. "Barely." "Tell me about her shoes." He looked confused. "Her first walking shoes," I said. "What color are they?" He swallowed. "Red. My daughter bought red ones." "Does Lucy like them?" "She hates them." "Good. Tell me why." While he described his granddaughter pulling off one shoe and throwing it across the kitchen, the firefighters worked around us. One slid a metal brace beneath the damaged dashboard. Another positioned the hydraulic spreader. The captain kept his eyes on the slope and the straps holding the truck in place. I kept mine on Daniel. Asking about Lucy was not small talk. Pain, shock, and cold were pulling him inward. I needed him oriented. I needed him answering questions. I needed him to remember that somewhere beyond the snow, a little girl in red shoes expected her grandfather to come home. The radio cracked against my shoulder. "Major, every camera in the state is pointed at that highway." I turned my head just enough to see flashing lights beyond the safety line. A local news crew had parked near the roadblock. Another camera stood farther back beside a state patrol vehicle. I did not care what they could see. I cared whether they stayed out of the way. "Then tell them to stay behind the line." The words came out flat and automatic. There was nothing heroic in them. Reporters crossing into the work zone would become another problem for people who already had too many. At the time, I did not know that footage from the scene had already reached a station in Denver. I did not know that my father was 40 miles away, sitting at the head of a Christmas table where no one had set a place for me. I did not know that before the night was over, he would hear a stranger say my name with more pride than he had shown me in years. All I knew was that the truck moved again. The cab dropped several inches. Daniel cried out. One of the firefighters slipped, caught himself against the doorframe, and shouted for the others to tighten the support line. The captain leaned closer. "We have one attempt. If the lift does not hold, everyone comes out." I looked at the dashboard pressing against Daniel's leg. Then I looked at the slope below us. For 1 second, I wondered whether we had already stayed too long. That decision was not mine alone. I had medical experience, but the fire captain controlled the extraction. I waited for his assessment instead of pretending rank gave me authority over every danger in front of me. He studied the straps, the angle of the cab, and the position of his crew. Then he nodded. "We go on my count." One firefighter locked the spreader into place. Another reached for Daniel's seatbelt. I moved closer, keeping one hand near his neck and the other against his shoulder. His skin felt cold even through my glove. "Daniel, keep talking to me." He drew a rough breath. "You married?" "No." "Kids?" "No." His eyes moved toward the Christmas patch sewn onto a firefighter's sleeve. Then he looked back at me. "Aren't you supposed to be home for Christmas?" The question reached a place the cold had not touched. I had spent years learning how to stay calm when lives depended on me. What I had never learned was how to stop becoming a child again whenever my father made me feel unwanted. The fire captain raised one hand. Ready, the hydraulic tool began to whine, and just before the damaged dashboard started to lift, my mind returned to the phone call that had brought me there. 3 nights earlier, I had been locking my office, thinking the worst thing waiting for me was the weather. Then my father called. 3 nights earlier, I had been locking my office, thinking the worst thing waiting for me was the weather. Then my father called. The building had gone quiet. Most of the staff had left, and the hallway lights had switched to their dim nighttime setting. I turned off the lamp beside my desk and checked the weather on my phone. Snow was expected by Christmas Eve, nothing unusual for Colorado. My flight home was still on schedule. Beside my computer sat a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a Western novel my father had mentioned months earlier. I planned to carry it on the plane so the corners would not get crushed. For a moment, I pictured his kitchen. The roast chicken my mother used to make, the cinnamon candles he still bought because they reminded him of her, the chipped serving bowl he refused to replace. Then my phone vibrated. "Dad." I smiled before answering. I thought he wanted my flight time or planned to remind me to bring a heavier coat. His voice sounded careful. "Not warm. Careful." He asked whether I was still at work. I said I was leaving. There was a pause, followed by a breath that sounded rehearsed. "I need you to sit this Christmas out." My hand stayed on the light switch. "Sit it out?" He explained that my stepbrother and his new wife were bringing her parents. My stepbrother had endured a rough year and was trying to rebuild his business. Dad wanted the evening to go well for him. I waited for the part that involved me. It came quickly. Dad said people always asked me about the guard, the deployments, and the medals. He did not want the whole night becoming another conversation about my career. I had never brought medals to dinner. I rarely mentioned my work unless someone asked. But in my father's version of events, other people's interest in my life had become something I was doing to my stepbrother. "Are you asking me not to come home because my life makes him uncomfortable?" Dad said that was not how he would put it. Then he used the sentence people often use when they want an unfair choice to sound responsible. "I'm trying to keep the peace." I looked at the wrapped book. "Whose peace?" The line went quiet. I heard a television behind him. Dishes moved in a sink. Ordinary sounds from a house I had spent years trying to believe was still mine. He did not answer. Families often use the phrase, "keep the peace," when what they really mean is that one person has been selected to absorb all the discomfort. Usually, it is the person least likely to protest, the dependable one, the reasonable one, the one everyone calls strong. I had spent most of my adult life being called strong. That night, I began to understand how often people use your strength as an excuse not to protect you. One memory surfaced. The year I made major, Dad called to congratulate me. Less than 2 minutes later, he was telling me that my stepbrother had put an offer on a house. I stood in my kitchen holding my promotion certificate while Dad explained mortgage rates. I had told myself it did not matter. I had become very skilled at that. Part of me wanted to argue. I wanted to ask whether he had ever told my stepbrother to stay home because my feelings needed protecting. I wanted to remind him that I was his daughter, not a difficult guest. But I knew what would happen. If I raised my voice, the conversation would become about my reaction. I would be called defensive, dramatic, the person creating the tension he claimed he wanted to avoid. So I did not give him that exit. Understood. Merry Christmas, Dad. He hesitated. You're not going to argue? Would it change your decision? Another silence. He did not say yes. I ended the call. For several seconds, I remained standing with my coat on and my phone in my hand. Then I sat down. The airline app was open to my reservation. I pressed cancel flight. A message asked if I was sure. I confirmed. A second message asked me to review the cancellation. The airline asked me twice if I was sure. My father had not asked once. When the confirmation arrived, I placed the phone beside the wrapped book. I did not tear the paper or throw the gift away. I opened the bottom drawer and set it inside. One of the officers passed my doorway. You heading home Wednesday? Plans changed. He studied my face for half a second, then nodded. Good people know when not to force open a closed door. After he left, my phone lit up again. This time it was a winter weather alert. A storm was moving toward the Interstate 70 corridor. Travel could become dangerous by Christmas Eve. I cleared the warning and finished locking my office. I had no idea that the same storm would soon put my face on every television in the country. By the next morning, my seat on the flight had been canceled, my place at my father's table had been erased, and the duty roster still had one empty line beside Christmas Eve. The empty line beside Christmas Eve was still there when I came in the next morning. Sergeant Lena Ortiz was scheduled for the overnight shift. She had never asked me to change it. Lena had 2 children at home. Her husband was working out of state through December, so she had been handling school pickups, groceries, and bedtime on her own. Her youngest had saved one last ornament for Christmas Eve, a crooked paper star with too much glue and his name across the back. She had mentioned it once, almost by accident. She had not used it to ask for anything. I stood in front of the duty roster with a pen in my hand. I'll take Christmas Eve. Lena looked up from a stack of supply forms. Ma'am, you have a flight. Not anymore. She studied me for a second, not in the way people do when they are hungry for details. She simply noticed my untouched coffee and the fact that I had arrived before everyone else. Then she nodded. She did not ask what happened. She did not tell me I looked upset. She did not turn my silence into a problem she could solve. Instead, she said her sister's house always had an extra chair. I gave her the kind of smile people use when they are grateful and already planning to say no. Lena caught it. My sister always cooks for twice as many people as she invites, she said. You'd fit right in. The forecast is getting worse. We may be activated. It was true. It was also not the whole truth. Lena knew that, but she let me keep the part I was not ready to explain. People who care about you do not always demand access to every wound. Sometimes they just make sure you know the door is open. I had no trouble giving someone else my seat. The harder thing was believing I deserved one of my own. Lena gathered her papers and started toward the hallway. At the door, she stopped. Just because someone forgot to make room for you doesn't mean you don't have a place. Then she left before I could answer. For a while, I stared at the chair across from my desk. It was ordinary. Gray fabric, one wheel that squeaked whenever someone leaned back. Still, I could not stop looking at it. One person related to me by blood had removed my place from a table. Another person, with no obligation beyond friendship, had offered to pull up a chair. When you have been treated like an inconvenience long enough, even kindness can feel like something you should apologize for accepting. By late afternoon, the building had emptied again. I heated a small container of soup in the break room. The center stayed cold, but I ate a few spoonfuls anyway. My phone filled the silence. Families posed beside Christmas trees. Children wore matching pajamas. Travelers complained about crowded airports. Long tables appeared under warm lights. I was not jealous of every family I saw. I was tired of reminding myself that I did not need what they had. Loneliness is not always having no one. Sometimes it is knowing exactly whose table you wanted to sit at and understanding that they chose not to set a place. The weather alert changed just after 5. What had been a winter advisory became a blizzard warning. The operations center began receiving calls. Vehicles were sliding off the road west of Denver. Visibility was dropping. Mountain routes might close before dark. I carried my soup to the sink. The person who had been hurt by a phone call could wait. The officer on duty could not. I changed into field gear, checked the cold weather supplies, and secured my personal phone in my locker. Then I walked into the operations room. The first accident appeared on the main screen, then another. Before I tell you what happened when that storm reached the interstate, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I always find it remarkable how a story can bring people together from completely different places. A few minutes later, the emergency line rang. The dispatcher reported a passenger bus on its side. There were children on board, a fuel truck had swerved to avoid the wreck and was losing its hold on the shoulder. Chairs moved, radios came alive, people reached for jackets and equipment lists. At 6:42 that evening, the call came through. A bus was down on Interstate 70, children were trapped, and a fuel truck was sliding toward the wreck. At 6:42 that evening, the call came through. A bus was down on Interstate 70, children were trapped, and a fuel truck was sliding toward the wreck. The order to activate followed less than a minute later. I checked names before vehicles. Who had eaten? Who had slept? Who had driven in mountain weather before? Then I checked cold weather gear, first aid kits, portable lights, blankets, and spare batteries. Rank matters in the military. At a civilian disaster scene, what matters more is knowing when to lead and when to support the people who already own the problem. The state police controlled the highway. The fire department controlled the rescue. The medical teams controlled patient care. We were there to bring people, equipment, and structure where the storm had created gaps. We moved west in a slow convoy. Visibility dropped until the taillights ahead became red smears in the snow. Broken branches covered the shoulder. One family vehicle sat nose down in a ditch, empty except for a child's blanket against the rear window. The radio carried one accident after another. For a few seconds, I pictured my father's house. Warm kitchen lights, food on the table, my mother's old serving bowl, a chair no one had saved for me. Then the lead vehicle slowed, and the thought was gone. The bus lay on its side beyond a wall of emergency lights. Snow blew through broken windows. The front door was pinned against the pavement. Farther uphill, the fuel truck leaned toward the shoulder, its cab twisted at an angle that tightened my stomach. I reported to the fire captain and the state patrol supervisor. They needed help moving passengers, setting up a warming area, and keeping the ambulance lane open. I divided my team by task. One group went to the bus, another prepared blankets and heaters, a third kept the ambulance lane open. One soldier stayed beside me to maintain contact with command. Leadership is often described as giving orders. Most of the time, it is making sure everyone knows where to stand and what not to miss. Inside the bus, people called names over one another. Luggage had fallen from the racks. Several passengers hung sideways in their seatbelts. Snow came through a shattered window and melted across the floor. A man near the rear pressed one hand to his chest. A woman kept shouting that she could not find her daughter. The firefighters opened a route through the emergency exit. I helped organize those who could still walk. The strongest came out first to clear space. I counted each person as they reached the ground. One soldier checked names against the driver's passenger list. Do not go back for your bags. Keep moving toward the lights. Near the middle of the bus, I found a little girl curled beneath a seat. She was breathing too fast. One hand clutched a pink backpack, the other caught my sleeve and would not let go. Look at me. Not the snow, not the lights, just me. Her eyes moved to mine. I counted slowly with her. In, hold, out. A medic found her inhaler in the backpack. What color is your bedroom? Purple. Dark purple or light purple? Light. Good. Stay with that. Children do not care about rank. They care whether your voice sounds like something they can hold on to. When we found her mother, the woman dropped to her knees in the snow. I placed the girl in her arms and moved away. Later, the camera would show that moment. It would not show the medic, the firefighter, or the soldier who found her mother. Cameras like simple stories. Real rescues are never simple, and they are never solitary. Most passengers were out when a firefighter ran toward us from the fuel truck. The driver was still inside. His leg was trapped beneath the dashboard. He was bleeding, cold, and losing track of where he was. The cab had shifted twice. Heavy rescue was still too far away. The fire captain studied the slope, the damaged frame, and the support straps. Waiting was no longer safer. He authorized an emergency extraction. I told him about my medical background. I could protect the driver's neck and keep him responsive while his crew worked the metal. The captain agreed because the role needed filling, not because of my rank. That was how I found myself kneeling beside Daniel while the truck moved beneath us. He told me about his granddaughter, red shoes, 14 months old, just learning to walk. The radio warned me about the cameras. I told them to stay behind the line. Then the cab dropped again. 30 seconds, the captain shouted. Daniel's eyes started to close. I pressed a hand against his shoulder. You don't get to sleep yet. Your granddaughter is waiting. The hydraulic tool whined. One firefighter lifted the dashboard. Another cut the seatbelt. Two more waited outside. I held Daniel's head steady as the metal rose. Now, his leg came free. We pulled together. My boot slid on fuel beneath the snow, and my knee struck the pavement. I did not let go. Someone caught my coat. Another pair of hands took Daniel's weight. We cleared the cab just as the support line snapped tight. The truck shifted downhill. Part of the frame collapsed into the space where we had been seconds earlier. No one cheered. The medics took Daniel. I checked his pulse, gave them what I knew, and turned back to my team. I accounted for every soldier. I asked about injuries. I made 2 people replace soaked gloves before their fingers went numb. Then we went back to work. At the scene, everyone knew what they needed from me. In my family, I had never known how small I was supposed to become before everyone else felt comfortable. Disasters had protocols. Families had preferences, grudges, and rules no one admitted existed. Being needed had always been easier for me than being loved. Need came with instructions. Love apparently came with conditions. A reporter called out and asked for my name. I kept walking. A public affairs specialist reached me near the warming vehicles. "Major, your face is already on television." I assumed she meant local coverage. I told her we would deal with it later. 40 miles away, someone at my father's table reached for the remote. While I was checking whether every member of my team still had feeling in their fingers, my father was lifting a wine glass in a room where no one had spoken my name all evening. I learned what happened at my father's table months later, in pieces, from people who remembered the silence more clearly than the meal. The Christmas lights were on outside his house, the same white lights he used every year, wrapped around the porch railing and the small pine tree near the driveway. Inside, the dining table was set with my mother's china. One chair had been removed to make more room for the guests. No one said it was mine. My father had cooked the green bean casserole I used to ask for every Christmas. It sat near the end of the table, almost untouched. My stepbrother was talking about reopening his business. His wife's parents listened while he explained new plans, new investors, and everything he intended to do differently. Dad smiled at the right moments. He looked proud. According to my stepbrother, no one mentioned me during dinner. He knew Dad had asked me not to come. What he did not know was that I had canceled my flight and taken the overnight shift because of it. He told himself I probably had other plans. Maybe I was eating with friends. Maybe I preferred working holidays. Maybe traditions did not matter much to someone like me. I had always been independent. That explanation made everything easier. People can live comfortably beside an injustice when they give the injured person enough qualities to survive it. She is strong. She is busy. She will understand. My stepbrother noticed the extra space near the end of the table. He noticed the serving dish no one had touched. He said nothing. After dinner, one of his wife's relatives asked whether the highway would be safe enough to drive home. Someone reached for the remote and turned on the television. The news began with the overturned bus. My father only glanced at the screen. Then the station played footage from a state patrol body camera. My voice came through the speakers. "Keep the lane clear. We still have children coming out." My father stopped moving. He recognized my voice before the camera showed my face. My stepbrother stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. The report cut between several scenes: passengers climbing through the emergency exit, soldiers carrying blankets, firefighters working beside the fuel truck. Then the screen showed me kneeling in the snow, placing the little girl back into her mother's arms. Another clip showed the rescue team pulling Daniel from the cab. My hand was behind his neck. 2 firefighters carried most of his weight. The camera angle made it look as if I stood at the center of everything. The station showed me again beside a map spread across the hood of a patrol vehicle. Snow clung to my collar and eyelashes. The anchor spoke over the footage. Major Claire Bennett of the Colorado Army National Guard is being credited with coordinating a rescue that brought 42 people to safety. One of the guests looked across the table. "Bennett? Robert, isn't that your daughter?" Dad did not answer. The guest waited, then asked the question that changed the room. "Where is she tonight?" No one accused my father of anything. They did not have to. Sometimes the truth enters a room as a question. Dad could not say I was on my way. He could not say I had chosen another dinner. He could not say I had been invited and work had kept me away. He knew exactly why I was not sitting at that table. He had been afraid my presence would make someone else feel small. In the end, it was my absence that exposed him. The television returned to the moment when I handed the little girl to her mother. The wine glass slipped from my father's hand. It struck the hardwood and broke near his chair. No one bent down to pick it up. My stepbrother looked at the empty space at the table. For the first time, he understood that I was not missing by accident. My absence had been chosen. Dad had made the decision, and he had accepted it because the decision benefited him. He later told me his first instinct was to defend himself. He had never asked Dad to exclude me. He had never said I should stay away. Both things were true. They were also incomplete. He had known what Dad planned to do, and he had not objected. He had allowed himself to enjoy a room where he no longer had to feel compared to me. As the report continued, other memories came back to him. Calls where Dad changed the subject whenever I mentioned work. Family gatherings where my life became something people discussed only until he grew uncomfortable. Packages Dad had once assumed came from him. My stepbrother remembered those gifts. He did not explain them to anyone that night. Not yet. Dad left the broken glass where it was and walked into the kitchen with his phone. His first call did not reach me. My personal phone was still locked away while I used the radio and finished the incident report. He called again. When I finally checked the screen, his name was waiting there. "Dad." The television was still playing behind him. I stood in the hallway with wet gloves in one hand and stared at the phone until it nearly stopped ringing. At 12:17 in the morning, with the television still playing behind him, my father called the daughter he had told not to come home. At 12:17 in the morning, my father called the daughter he had told not to come home. I had just finished the preliminary report. Every member of my team had been accounted for. No one had suffered more than bruises, cold hands, and the kind of exhaustion that arrives after fear finally lets go. I pulled off my wet gloves and took a sip of coffee. It had gone cold. My phone showed 7 missed calls. 2 were from the public affairs office. 1 was from my commanding officer. The rest were from numbers I did not recognize. Then my father's name appeared again. Lena looked at the screen from across the room. She did not ask whether I planned to answer. I carried the phone into the hallway, where the radios sounded farther away. For a few seconds, I simply watched it ring. Then I answered, "Sweetheart, why are you on the national news?" The word sweetheart stopped me. He had not called me that in years. Behind him, I could hear the television. An anchor was describing the rescue. There were low voices in the room, followed by the sound of someone moving dishes. Dad sounded frightened, not only because I had been in danger. He sounded like a man who had suddenly realized that everyone around him knew something important about his daughter before he did. "We had an emergency," I said. He took a breath. "Why didn't you tell me you were working tonight?" I closed my eyes. There were many answers available. "You told me not to come home. You were not interested in where I would spend Christmas. You are only asking because strangers are watching. If there had been no camera, when would you have noticed?" I could have said all of it. Instead, I gave him the simplest truth. "You didn't ask." The television continued behind him. Neither of us spoke. Then he began. "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't. I was not cruel. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. For years, I had softened facts before handing them to my father. I told him I understood. I said things were fine. I helped him leave difficult conversations without feeling like the person who had caused the pain. This time, I left the truth in its original shape. He said he could drive to the base when the roads opened. Then he suggested I come to the house once my work was finished. I looked through the narrow window at the snow outside. The storm had begun to ease, but the roads were still dangerous. That was not the reason I refused. I'm safe. My soldiers are safe. There are still reports to finish. "Can we talk when you're done?" "Not tonight." His breathing changed. "Are you angry?" I leaned against the wall. "I'm tired." Anger would have been easier for him. Anger could be blamed on the moment. Tiredness carried years inside it. He said my name. I almost stayed on the line. Some small part of me still wanted him to find the right words. Another part wanted the phone to go silent and remain silent until I no longer cared. "Good night, Dad," I ended the call. People talk about boundaries as if they feel like victory. Mine felt more like closing a door while part of me was still standing on the other side. My hand shook after the screen went dark. I stayed against the wall until my breathing settled. Then I returned to the room and checked on my team again. For years, my silence had protected him from the consequences of hurting me. That night, for the first time, it protected me instead. My phone kept vibrating. Reporters, relatives I had not heard from in years, old friends, my father. I turned it face down. Lena placed a fresh cup of coffee beside me without saying anything. It was hot enough to warm my hands. Outside, the snow fell more gently. Inside, the television replayed my face. Millions of people could know my name, and it still would not answer the question I had carried since childhood. Why was I always the easiest person for my father to leave out? By morning, the footage had reached national networks. Interview requests filled my inbox. The public affairs office wanted a statement. Messages arrived from people we had rescued. Dad had sent 6 texts. My stepbrother had sent only 1. I need to tell you the truth about something. I thought the hardest part of Christmas was over when I ended that call. I was wrong. By sunrise, the entire country knew my name, and the 2 men in my family had begun remembering all the things they had allowed themselves to forget. When I woke, my phone held more messages than I could count. I had slept for less than 2 hours in a chair in the break room. My neck hurt. One boot was still on. The other sat beneath the table where it had fallen after I stopped caring enough to put it back. My voicemail was full. National networks wanted interviews. Morning shows wanted a live appearance. A news producer wanted to film me returning home for Christmas, as if the holiday were a scene that could be recreated once the cameras arrived. The body camera footage had already been viewed millions of times. People I had not spoken to since high school sent messages saying they had always known I would do something extraordinary. Relatives who could not remember my last duty station wrote that they had never been prouder. On the screen, I looked calm. I remembered something different. I remembered the cab moving beneath my knees. I remembered my boots slipping. I remembered the exact second I wondered whether we had waited too long to pull Daniel out. The public saw 40 seconds of courage. They did not see the years it had taken me to become someone who could function while afraid. People like stories with a clear emergency. There is a siren. Someone arrives. A decision is made. Eventually, someone announces that the danger has passed. Family wounds are not like that. They have no warning lights, no command center, no moment when everyone agrees the scene is finally secure. By mid-morning, the public affairs officer sat across from me with a legal pad and 3 pages of interview requests. She explained that I could refuse most of them, but the unit needed to release a statement. I agreed on several conditions. The fire captain had to be named. The medical teams had to be recognized. The state patrol had to be included. No report could claim that I had rescued 42 people by myself, and no one was going to arrange an interview at my father's house. No one person brought those people home, I said. The story needs to reflect that. She nodded and wrote it down. Cameras prefer a single face. Responsibility rarely belongs to one. That afternoon, Lena walked into my office and placed her phone on my desk. You should see this. My father had shared the rescue footage. Above it, he had written, "Our family could not be prouder." She has always put service before herself, even when it meant missing Christmas with us. I read the sentence twice. It sounded loving. That was what made it worse. His version suggested I had chosen duty over dinner. It suggested my family had expected me home and had accepted my absence with pride. It made my empty chair look like a sacrifice I had willingly made. Beneath the post, strangers praised him. One person wrote that he must be an incredible father. Another thanked my family for raising such a remarkable woman. Someone else said, it must have been difficult for all of them to celebrate without me. I stared at the comments until the words began to blur. My father was being congratulated for raising the daughter he had asked not to come home. Being unseen had always hurt. Being rewritten while I was still standing there felt like a different kind of disappearance. The situation grew worse before the day ended. A local station contacted him because the post was spreading. He did not hold a press conference or seek out a camera. It was only a short phone interview, the kind people agree to before they understand how far a sentence can travel. The host asked whether he had known I would be working on Christmas Eve. Dad answered, "She has always been dedicated. We understood that duty came first." He did not tell a complete lie. He did something more careful. He arranged the truth so that people would reach the wrong conclusion on their own. I listened to the recording in the public affairs office. The officer asked whether I wanted to correct him, not publicly. I approved a short statement saying my duty schedule had changed at the last minute. All personal questions about my family would remain private. I would not turn a disaster involving dozens of frightened people into a public argument about Christmas dinner. But privacy and protection are not the same thing. Privacy keeps something personal. Protection asks the injured person to preserve the reputation of the one who hurt them. For years, I had been expected to protect my family from the appearance of unfairness by never describing the unfairness itself. That afternoon, my stepbrother called. I expected an apology. Instead, his first words were, "Dad is getting destroyed online." I haven't said anything about him. He knew that. He said one of the dinner guests had told a neighbor that I had not been invited. His wife's family had started asking questions. Someone had left a comment beneath Dad's post. The press might discover the whole story. Then he said, "We just need everyone to stick to the same version." Which version? He hesitated. That you had duty, that you were never going to make it. I let the silence sit between us. Then I asked him to say clearly what he wanted. "You want me to tell people I chose not to come?" He began explaining, but I stopped him. You want me to protect Dad from the consequences of telling his daughter she would make Christmas awkward. He said that was not what he meant. It is exactly what you meant. You just preferred the version where no one said it out loud. His voice tightened. Dad was getting older. The pressure was bad for him. His wife's parents were judging the family. This could damage relationships that mattered. Then he said, I had never cared much about what strangers thought. There it was again, my strength being used as evidence that I could absorb one more injury. I won't call a reporter. I won't post the phone call, but I will not lie for either of you. He asked whether I planned to let everyone think the worst. I'm going to let the truth exist without cleaning it up for you. He said my name as if I were being unreasonable. I didn't put Dad in this position. He did, and you helped him stay comfortable in it. Then I ended the call. Silence can be generous when it protects someone's privacy. It becomes self-betrayal when it is demanded as payment for belonging. For most of my life, I had confused being the mature one with being the person who absorbed every consequence. That day, I stopped volunteering. The next morning, a small envelope arrived at the base. Inside was a crayon drawing from the little girl on the bus. She had drawn a yellow bus in the snow. Beside it stood a person in uniform. Farther away was a house with bright windows and a child holding her mother's hand. Across the top, in uneven letters, she had written, "Thank you for finding my mom." I placed the picture inside my desk drawer. Some things matter more when they are not displayed for anyone else. Later, Daniel left a message from the hospital. My granddaughter gets another Christmas with me because your team refused to leave me there. He said your team, not my name. That meant more to me than any headline. I listened twice, then saved it without sharing it. Praise from strangers made me visible. Gratitude from the people we brought home reminded me why visibility had never been the point. 2 days later, my stepbrother sent another message. I was wrong to ask you to lie. There's something else I need to admit, and I need to do it in person. A formal request to visit the base followed. I stared at the screen for a long time before approving it. I thought he was finally coming to apologize for Christmas. I did not know he was about to confess that the empty chair at that table had begun years before my father told me not to come home. If you are still listening, please leave a comment below and tell me how satisfied you are with the story so far. It lets me know there are still people walking beside me through this entire journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement I have as I continue into the final part. 2 days later, my stepbrother arrived at the base exactly when he said he would. He checked in at the visitor center, showed his identification, and waited until someone escorted him to the small conference room I had chosen. He wore jeans, a plain coat, and the expression of a man who had not slept well. He did not bring a gift. He did not try to hug me. I was grateful for both. Shame can make a person look smaller. It does not automatically make them honest. I reminded myself of that before I sat down across from him. The room had no windows. There was a metal table between us, 2 plastic chairs, and a clock that ticked louder than it should have. A neutral room felt safer. He looked at his hands before speaking. I never asked him to uninvite you. I had expected him to start there. That's not the same as asking him to invite me back. He looked away. Finally, he admitted he had complained to Dad more than once. Whenever I came home, people asked about the guard, the deployments, and the places I had been. They remembered my promotions and forgot the details of whatever he had announced. He said every achievement in his life seemed smaller when I entered the room. He had been afraid his wife's parents would compare us. He wanted one dinner where he could feel successful without wondering whether someone would turn toward me and ask about something he could never match. None of that made him evil. It made him insecure. But insecurity can still become cruelty when someone else is forced to pay for it. He told me that when Dad said I would not be coming, he had not been surprised. Then his voice dropped. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. I was relieved. I did not answer. He had not built the system that favored him, but he had learned how to live comfortably inside it. That comfort had depended on my absence. Then he said there was something else. For the past 3 years, I had sent Dad gifts directly from stores. A book he mentioned wanting, a bottle of bourbon he liked, a restored copy of an old family photograph damaged in a move. The packages did not always include clear cards. Dad assumed they came from my stepbrother. The first time, he had planned to correct him. Then Dad thanked him with a warmth he had been wanting for years. So he said nothing. The second time was easier. By the third, silence had become a habit. "I liked the way he looked at me," he said. The words landed harder than I expected. The gifts were not expensive. That was never the point. I had sent them because I wanted Dad to know I remembered what he liked. I wanted some small part of me to remain present in a house where I was becoming easier to overlook. My stepbrother had allowed that proof of love to strengthen his place in the family, while mine kept fading. Did you ever thank him when he thought they were yours? He did not look at me. That was the answer. You didn't take the gifts, you took the silence that came with them. People think theft requires taking an object. Sometimes it is enough to stand quietly while love meant for someone else is credited to you. He said he was sorry. Then he added that he did not expect me to forgive him. Part of him still did. I heard it in the pause. He was waiting for me to say it was okay. Waiting for me to rescue him from the weight of what he had admitted. I did not. Sometimes people confess because they want to give you the truth. Sometimes they confess because they can no longer bear carrying it. The difference appears after you refuse to make them feel better. I'm glad you told me. That doesn't mean I'm ready to trust you, he nodded. Confession tells me you understand what you did. Change will tell me whether you understand what it cost. He accepted that without arguing. Telling the truth was the beginning of accountability, not the price of admission back into my life. Before he left, he told me Dad had started asking questions. Where had I been stationed? Which holidays had I missed because of duty, and which because no one made room for me? Which gifts had actually come from me? Why did he not know the name of a single person in my unit? My stepbrother said Dad wanted to visit the base. He did not know whether I would allow it. I gave no answer. He stood, thanked me for listening, and walked out without asking for anything else. 10 minutes later, the visitor center called. My father was at the gate. He had not tried to force his way in. He had not told anyone that being my father gave him special access. He only said, "I'm at the visitor center. If you don't want to see me, I'll leave." For the first time, he was asking instead of assuming. I could have told the guard to send him home. For several minutes, I almost did. I could have told the guard to send him home. For several minutes, I almost did. My father had checked in properly. He had shown his identification, answered the security questions, and taken a seat in the visitor center. He had not argued with the staff. He had not announced that he was my father, as if that gave him the right to enter. He simply waited. The guard told me he had been sitting in the same plastic chair for nearly an hour. Part of me wondered whether leaving him there was punishment. Another part wondered whether letting him in would be surrender. I did not want to make a decision simply because his presence had become inconvenient. I had spent too many years accepting conversations on other people's schedules. Finally, I called the visitor center. "I'll sign him in." When I arrived, Dad stood too quickly. His hands went into his coat pockets, then came out again. He looked older than he had at Christmas. Not because much time had passed, but because certainty no longer held his face together. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "This is a visit. It isn't forgiveness. I understand." I led him through the areas where visitors were allowed. He stayed beside me and did not ask for special access. Dad had seen photographs of me in uniform for years. He knew the dates of my promotions. He did not know what each one had cost me. As we walked down the first hallway, 2 soldiers passed us. "Good morning, Major." I returned the greeting. Another soldier stopped to give me a quick update about vehicle maintenance. Before he left, I asked whether his wrist was healing properly. A few steps later, I saw one of my senior enlisted soldiers. I asked how his wife's surgery had gone and whether she was back home. Dad watched both conversations without speaking. Near the supply room, another soldier told me his daughter's fever had finally broken. I told him to let me know if he needed to adjust his schedule. The respect around me was easy to mistake for rank from a distance. Up close, my father began to see something else. People were not careful around me because they were afraid. They spoke directly. They asked questions. They trusted that I would hear an unpleasant answer without punishing the person who gave it. They followed me because I had spent years proving that I would not ask them to carry something I was unwilling to carry myself. A young soldier came toward us near the stairwell. He greeted me, then paused when he recognized my father from the news coverage. "Sir," he said politely. Dad nodded. The soldier turned back to me. "Ma'am, I never thanked you properly for moving that training date." I told him it had been a small adjustment. His wife had gone into labor earlier than expected. Moving one exercise on the schedule had allowed him to reach the hospital before his son was born. "You did the work," I said. "I moved one line on a schedule." He smiled. It was the most important line on the page to me. Then he continued down the hallway. Dad remained still for a moment. The television had shown him a dramatic rescue. It had shown snow, flashing lights, and strangers being carried to safety. It had not shown him this. Leadership often lives in choices too small for a camera. A schedule changed, a name remembered, a question asked before someone has to ask for help. The soldiers around me respected what I could do. What I had wanted from my father was never admiration, it was curiosity. We reached a display area near the meeting rooms. Photographs and unit awards covered one wall. My name appeared on several documents, but it was no larger than anyone else's. Dad stopped in front of a photograph taken during flood relief several years earlier. "You were there?" "Yes." He looked at me. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" "I did." His expression changed. I reminded him of the call. I had told him our unit had been sent to help a town where the river had reached the first floors of several homes. I had started describing the families sleeping inside a school gym. He had listened for a few minutes. Then he had told me my stepbrother was looking at houses and needed advice about mortgage rates. I did not accuse him. I only repeated the order in which the conversation had happened. Dad looked back at the photograph. "Why didn't you ever tell me more?" "I did tell you some of it. You usually change the subject to him." The hallway stayed quiet. He rested one hand against the edge of the display case. "I thought you didn't need me." Needing less is what people learn when asking becomes expensive. He looked at me, but I did not soften the sentence. There had been difficult nights when I called him. He usually told me I was strong, capable, resilient. He meant those words as praise. After a while, they began to sound like instructions. Handle it yourself. You always do. Eventually, I stopped offering him the parts of my life that required patience. Self-sufficiency is often praised as a personality trait. Sometimes it is simply the scar left by unanswered requests. Dad said quietly, "I'm proud of you. You're proud of what you saw on television." He started to object, but I continued, "You don't know enough about me yet to be proud of the whole person." The words hurt him. I could see that. But real interest is asking a question whose answer may be long, inconvenient, or painful, and staying long enough to hear it. Dad asked whether he could take me to dinner. I did not answer immediately. "Call me next week." He nodded. 1 week later, he called when he said he would. He did not mention the news. He did not ask whether I was still angry. "I'd like to cook dinner for you," he said. "Just the two of us. No audience and no explanations unless you ask for them." I agreed. I had faced overturned vehicles with less hesitation than I felt walking up my father's front steps that evening. I had faced overturned vehicles with less hesitation than I felt walking up my father's front steps that evening. The porch light was the same one he had left on for years. The glass around it had gone cloudy at the edges, but the warm circle it cast across the walkway still looked familiar. For a moment, I was 18 again. I saw the small mark on the doorframe where my mother had measured my height. I remembered standing there barefoot while she pressed a pencil above my head and told me not to cheat by lifting my heels. Then the front door opened. Dad stepped aside and let me enter. The smell reached me before he said anything. Roast chicken, rosemary, onions, the meal my mother used to make when she wanted the house to feel warmer than the weather outside. The large dining room table was empty. Dad had set 2 places at the smaller table in the kitchen. I believed that choice was deliberate. He was not asking me to sit in the same room where he had removed my place at Christmas. He was not pretending a fresh tablecloth could erase what had happened. We spoke about the weather while he served dinner. Neither of us ate much. Before I had finished the first few bites, Dad set down his fork. I was wrong. I treated your strength like permission to neglect you. He looked directly at me. I'm sorry. There is no but after that. Then he stopped. For most of my life, I had rushed to rescue other people from uncomfortable silence. I would accept part of the blame, offer an explanation, say I understood, anything to keep the other person from sitting too long with the damage they had caused. That night, I let the silence do its work. The refrigerator hummed behind him. The chicken cooled between us. Dad did not ask whether I accepted the apology. He did not explain himself until enough time had passed for the apology to remain separate from the explanation. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. After my mother died, he had not known what to do with either of our grief. I had been young, angry, and determined to leave home. When I joined the military, he convinced himself that I had chosen a life that did not include him. My stepbrother had been different. He asked for advice. He needed help with jobs, money, relationships, and every decision that frightened him. Dad felt useful around him. He made me feel needed, Dad said. You made me feel unnecessary. I put my fork down. I didn't make you feel that way. You decided not to ask. He lowered his eyes. His grief explained some of his choices. It did not make me any less abandoned by them. Dad had told himself I was fine, because believing that required nothing from him. Every promotion became proof that I did not need support. Every problem I handled alone became another reason not to check whether I wanted company. Eventually, his assumption became a habit. Then, the habit became our relationship. You didn't just choose him for one dinner, I said. You built a family where I was expected to make myself smaller so everyone else could feel comfortable. Dad remained still. I told him I had never carried medals into the dining room. I had never asked guests to discuss my deployments. I had never competed with my stepbrother for attention. Other people had asked questions. Instead of telling them not to compare us, Dad had removed the person who made the comparison uncomfortable. Me. You didn't protect the peace, I said. You protected everyone except the person you knew would survive without being protected. His face tightened, but he did not argue. That mattered. Not enough to repair everything. Enough to tell me he was finally listening. An apology is not a request to be declared innocent. It is an acknowledgement that the other person's pain is real, even if forgiveness never arrives. Dad asked what he could do. I had spent enough years wishing people would understand my needs without being told. This time, I gave him clear answers. He could not speak for me to reporters or relatives. He could not use my career to present himself as the proud father when it was convenient. He could not invite me to family events while asking me to hide the parts of my life that made someone else insecure. He could not compare me with my stepbrother. He could not ask when I planned to forgive him, as if my healing were an appointment he needed placed on his calendar. And when I told him something had hurt me, he needed to listen before explaining what he had meant. A boundary is not a wall built to make someone suffer. It is a doorway with conditions designed to keep the same harm from walking back in. Dad listened to every condition. He did not negotiate. You don't get to be proud of me only when strangers are watching. His eyes lifted to mine. Then let me learn how to be proud of you when no one else is in the room. The answer affected me more than I wanted it to. I still did not tell him everything was fine. It was not. He asked one final question. Is there any chance left? I looked past him toward the dark dining room. The empty table was still there. So were the memories attached to it, but so was the small kitchen table between us. There is a chance to try. That's not the same as everything being fixed. He nodded. You can try. When I left, he walked me to the door. We did not hug. He opened it and stood beside the old mark on the frame where my mother had measured me years before. "Drive safely." "I will." The first Sunday call lasted 7 minutes. By the fourth week, we spoke for nearly an hour. But it is easy to promise change across a dinner table. The real test came months later, in the middle of an ordinary phone call. It is easy to promise change across a dinner table. The real test came months later, in the middle of an ordinary phone call. Dad began calling every Sunday. The first conversations were awkward. He kept a small list of questions beside him. I could hear the paper move whenever the silence lasted too long. How was work? Had Daniel recovered? Had the little girl from the bus sent another letter? How were the people in my unit? Sometimes the questions sounded practiced. I did not make fun of him. Sincerity does not always sound natural at first. Sometimes it sounds like someone practicing a language they should have learned years ago. Little by little, the calls became easier. Then one Sunday, I told him about a difficult decision involving 2 soldiers. Both were good people. There was only one opening for advanced training, and choosing one would disappoint the other. I had just begun explaining why the decision bothered me when Dad interrupted. "That reminds me, he is thinking about opening another business." I stopped talking. The old reaction rose inside me. I wanted to end the call and pretend the interruption did not matter. Before I could, Dad went quiet. I did it again. I said nothing. "I am sorry. You were telling me about your unit. Please finish." He did not explain. He did not ask me to reassure him. He simply returned the space to me. That moment mattered more than another long apology. Repair is not the absence of old habits. It is the willingness to recognize them before they become the same old wound. In the spring, Dad attended one of my promotion ceremonies. He arrived early and sat in the front row. He did not introduce himself to everyone. He did not ask for special photographs or tell anyone about the television coverage. Afterward, he waited while I spoke with my soldiers and their families. When someone asked who he was, he said, "I am her father." There was pride in his voice. This time it did not sound like ownership. My stepbrother sent a private message congratulating me. He did not post anything online. His changes were quieter. He corrected Dad about the old gifts. He stopped asking me to reassure his wife's family that everything was fine. When he sent Dad a birthday present, he wrote his own name clearly on the card. He also began talking about his failed business without comparing it to my career. We were not close. But our conversations no longer felt like competitions I had never agreed to enter. The biggest change came on a Wednesday night. A soldier in my unit was dealing with a serious family problem. I had changed his schedule, but by the end of the day, I was not sure I had made the right choice. Without planning to, I called Dad. He answered on the second ring. I explained what had happened. When I finished, he did not offer advice. "Do you want my opinion, or do you need me to listen?" The question surprised me. "Just listen." So he did. He did not compare the situation to his own life. He did not tell me I was strong enough to handle it. He stayed quiet until I had said everything I needed to say. Trust did not return as forgiveness. It returned as a Wednesday phone call I made without planning to. The most convincing apology my father ever gave me was not spoken. It was the moment he caught himself changing the subject and chose to listen instead. Early in December, I learned that I would be working part of Christmas Eve. Dad did not ask me to trade the shift. He only said, "Tell me when you get off." On Christmas Eve, the snow began falling gently. When my shift ended, the guard at the gate told me 2 people were waiting outside. 1 year after my father removed my place from his Christmas table, he was standing outside the gate, waiting for me to decide where we would go next. 1 year after my father removed my place from his Christmas table, he was standing outside the gate, waiting for me to decide where we would go next. Light snow settled on his shoulders and melted along the collar of his thin coat. He held a small box. The guard said he had been waiting almost 40 minutes. "Why didn't you wait in the car?" "I didn't want you walking out and wondering whether I remembered." A year earlier, I had been left outside the family. Now he had chosen to stand outside and wait for me to open the door. Inside the box was an old photograph from the day I signed my enlistment papers. I looked impossibly young. Dad stood beside me with one hand half raised, unsure whether he was allowed to place it on my shoulder. I turned the picture over. On the back he had written, "You were never hard to love. I was just too distracted by my own failures to love you well." For a moment, I could not speak. Thank you for finally saying it. Thank you for giving me the chance. Headlights moved across the snow. My stepbrother parked several spaces away and walked toward us alone. "I didn't know if you would want me here," he said. "Your dad said the choice should be yours." Dad did not answer for me. "You can come." It was not forgiveness. It was one open door. We drove to a veterans support center, serving Christmas dinner to anyone who needed a warm place to sit. The three of us carried trays, poured coffee, cleared dishes, and wiped tables. No one took pictures. No one posted where we were. Dad spent nearly half an hour listening to an older veteran describe the mechanic shop he had owned before his health failed. He did not interrupt. He did not change the subject. He simply listened. Family is what remains when the room is quiet, and there is no applause to borrow. I watched Dad refill the man's coffee and ask what happened to the shop. Then he stayed for the answer. That was when I understood what had truly changed. The storm did not make me worthy. It only made me visible. For years, I believed being overlooked meant there was something in me not worth seeing. I know better now. Someone else's failure to recognize your value does not reduce it. My father needed a national news story to see me. I needed longer to understand that I had never required his recognition to become who I already was. Recognition can confirm what is true. It cannot create worth, and its absence cannot destroy it. I did not return to the family we had been. We began building one that had never existed before. My stepbrother and I were not suddenly close. Dad still made mistakes. Some days, silence still felt safer than trust. The past was not erased. Forgiveness did not arrive all at once. I once believed I had to choose between protecting myself and loving my family. Love without boundaries had never protected any of us. A year earlier, my father told me not to come home because he feared my presence would make someone else feel small. That Christmas, he stood in the cold to make sure I never felt forgotten again. For the first time, the present felt trustworthy. Never mistake someone's failure to recognize your value for proof that you have none. The people who overlook you do not define you. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop asking for permission to occupy the space that was always yours. Do you think I was right to give my father and stepbrother another chance, or would you have walked away after that Christmas? And most importantly, were you satisfied with the way this story ended? Tell me honestly in the comments. What do you think about her decision? Would you have given her father and stepbrother another chance, or would you have chosen a different path? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspective may help someone else who has faced a similar choice. If this story gave you something to think about, please leave a like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe so you do not miss the stories still to come. Until we meet again in the next story, we are Honor Family Radio, using stories to walk beside you through the years and to help you rediscover peace, courage, and strength within your heart.